This is lecture number DR044LW10. This is the 44th of the Mega Genius lectures and the 10th of the Lost Wisdom series. It was recorded on 5 November 2010. The title of this lecture is Secrets of a Magical Being. It is 31 minutes long. Copyright 2010 by Mega Genius. All rights reserved. This lecture is protected by internationally valid copyright. It may not, in whole or in part, be duplicated, transmitted, or otherwise reproduced without the express permission of Mega Genius. Unauthorized translation, importation, or distribution is a violation of applicable laws. Mega Genius is a United States federally registered trademark and service mark. And now, here is Mega Genius.
Henry David Thoreau lived his life his way. In the final chapter of the American literary classic Walden, he wrote, quote, "If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away." Unquote. Another man who stepped to his own music was Charles Macartney, but few people knew that was his real name. He may have been born in 1901, or maybe 1892, although some people insisted that it was much earlier. Almost everything about him seemed enigmatic, but what was certain was that for most of his life, anyone who laid eyes on him never forgot him. Charles was born in the settlement of Sigourney in southeastern Iowa in the United States. People do not like what they do not understand, and they do like what they do understand. For that reason, we know that young Charles understood the goats on his family's farm well, for he formed an intriguing friendship with them that would span the 20th century. Nevertheless, Chess, as he was often called, longed for adventure away from farm life. The music to which his heart resonated sounded far away. So at age 14, he set upon what the American poet Robert Frost called the road less traveled by. He ran 1,000 miles away from home. In New York City, he briefly hawked newspapers on a street corner. Then he met a 24-year-old Spanish knife thrower, 10 years his senior, married her, and performed as his dagger-wielding wife's near-miss target, dodging 25 sharply honed blades nightly. Charles was barely a teenager, but the road that he had chosen harbored adventure around every bend. After a couple of years of dodging razor-sharp daggers, he returned to his goats and Iowa farmland which he had inherited, although his hope was to earn a better living there for his wife and son. The Great Depression soon ruined them, and they were forced to sign over the farm to pay off a grocery bill. Then Charles awoke the next morning to discover that his wife had deserted him. Although many men would have felt broken, Charles just laughed it off. He knew that he created his own happiness. Soon he married again, although his second wife often complained that life with him was more unpredictable than she had bargained for. She became hysterical when he wrestled a bear for money, and she agonized when he was nearly lynched by the Ku Klux Klan. Finally, in 1935, while he had been cutting timber for the Works Progress Administration, she was given the dreadful news that a falling tree had shattered his left side and killed him. In only an instant, she had become a widow. After having transported Charles' body to a mortician's table in the morgue, the undertaker plunged an embalming needle into Charles' mangled arm. Suddenly his eyes opened. He was conscious. He was alive. Miraculously, he hadn't departed after all. But his second wife did. Unable to bear any more of Charles' adventures, she immediately packed her bags and was gone. Well, Charles laughed it off again, grew a beard like his goats, and soon married for the third time. Supporting his family was a problem. His left arm was so badly mangled that it was almost useless, but he refused to go on the public dole. Determined to eke out a living despite his severe injuries, and inspired by the book Robinson Crusoe, he hitched his team of goats to an old wagon, piled aboard his son, his third wife, and all the other necessities of life. Dressed in goat skins, he set out to preach to others that they ought to get their lives in order before something tragic unexpectedly happened to them. About that time, as he was passing through the backwoods of northern Georgia, some deeply religious residents thought that the goat man looked just like painted images of their Christian Savior. Believing that the second coming was at hand, they decided that the goat man was Jesus Christ, and began lavishing him with gifts, which he freely accepted. After all, he hadn't told anyone that he was Jesus. He just hadn't quite gotten around yet to telling the townsfolk that he wasn't. Eventually, though, the Christians figured out who he wasn't, which was bad news and good news for Charles. The bad news was that the locals, who weren't in a forgiving mood, tarred and feathered him and ran him and his goats out of town. The good news was that the whole affair inspired him to pursue an occupation that would enable him and his family to get by. He became a traveling preacher, urging everyone who would listen to abide by the 10 Commandments of Christianity. Those who didn't listen, he warned with wooden signs painted with biblical scriptures surrounded by vibrant flames of hell, which he nailed all along the roadsides to trees. No one ever knew where the goat man was headed, but from his trail of flamboyant forewarnings of damnation, everyone always knew precisely where he had been. With the Christian townsfolk no longer showering Charles with gifts, his third wife claimed to have grown weary of the rickety wagon and the inconveniences of life on the road. Actually, it was that she secretly missed the company of an old beau back in Iowa, and she demanded that Charles return to farm life. After mulling over her ultimatum for several seconds, Charles concluded that his goats had been more loyal than any of his brides. So he sold his third wife to her old boyfriend in Iowa for $1,000, and with his son, goat cart, and team of loyal friends continued on down the road, following the music that only he heard. Every evening he camped wherever he could, usually in some open-minded farmer's field, where he would build a bonfire to stay warm and cook his supper, then milk and feed his goats, and invariably toss onto the flames an old automobile tire that he had scavenged along the road to keep the bugs away at night, and, he said, to add flavor to his food. Coal-black smoke rising way off in the moonlight was the sign. "The goat man's coming! The goat man's coming!" children would yell. Unlike gypsies, whom adults thought might steal their children, the goat man was always welcome, although children were admonished by their parents not to get too close. They warned them, quote, "When he gets here in the morning, you stay upwind. Remember, he smells as bad as his goats," unquote. A woman from Sylvania, Georgia, recalled that when she was a little girl, her daddy let the goat man camp on their property once. She remembered decades later, quote, "You could not stay around very long. The odor was tremendous," unquote. Then early the next day, the townsfolk would hear it in the distance long before they saw it. A wobbly, iron-wheeled, covered railroad wagon that enclosed a bed, a pot-bellied stove, and an enormous amount of junk piled high. Everything was embellished with dozens of hanging bric-a-brac, kettles and pots banging, and pans clanging, and grease caps jiggling, and hubcaps bouncing, and wash tubs clonking, and jugs knocking, and sleigh bells ringing, and license plates clattering, and cowbells clanging, and railroad lanterns swinging, and buckets rattling, and signs shaking, and scrap metal knocking, all tied to the top and sides of the wagon with kudzu vines, along with whatever other trash or treasures that he had discovered along the roadways, with one goat riding on top. The whole contraption was preceded by a team of 12 billy goats that pulled, and often followed by as many as 10 more that pushed, going uphill, and braked going downhill. Several more were not tied up at all, but just trailed behind. Another 6 or 8 nanny goats and their kids lived inside the wagon, along with any sick or injured goats, along with Ches McCartney, who seldom bathed or washed his tattered clothes, and who admitted that only his goats could stand the smell of him. But everybody knew his name, or at least the formal one that he had been given. As one farmer put it, quote, "You take a fellow who looks like a goat, travels around with goats, eats with goats, lies down among goats, and smells like a goat, and it won't be long before people will be calling him the Goat Man." Unquote. Well, finally, the entire clanging carnival-like conveyance joggled to a stop. Then, as billies, nannies, and kids continued bleating loudly, the long-bearded eccentric who walked beside his wagon, dressed in goat skins and a railroad cap, would pick up a goat that had been riding on the front seat in a box beside a bale of hay. The goat had no front legs, yet as he set it down, it began hopping all around the wagon on its back legs like a kangaroo. Townsfolk shook their heads and roared with laughter, and children shrieked and squealed with delight. Once again, at long last, the Goat Man had arrived in their neck of the woods. He sold everything, from whatever scrap metal he had managed to collect to headache powders, but his best-selling product was postcard pictures of himself and his goats, all of whom had names. And he accepted donations from posing for pictures, often being kissed by a goat, or standing beside one that he had named Billy Bluehorns, whom he said was more than 30 years old. Of course, he advertised or traded whatever else he had for whatever he could get. Occasionally he would sell a goat to someone who promised a good home, and of course he sold fresh, warm goat milk, at least to those who didn't notice that his containers were seldom washed. Incidentally, it was only a rumor that the Goat Man never bathed. It is a fact that every year, when he passed through Spring City, Tennessee, he took a bath at Watts Bar Lake, whether he needed one or not. Besides, he explained, quote, "The goats don't care how I smell or how I look. They trust me and have faith in me, and this is more than I can say about a lot of people," unquote. For nearly 6 decades, the Goat Man traveled up and down the United States, from the Great Lakes to the Florida Keys, on the old Dixie Highway. Always courteously keeping to the side of the road, he made 5 to 10 miles a day, averaging 7. Inside his wagon, he toted a barrel full of postcards that he had collected from his travels throughout the United States. Once, a blizzard had paralyzed every automobile attempting to ascend the treacherous Montego Mountain in Tennessee. Yet the Goat Man and his team trudged on up, passing all the other vehicles, although he admitted later that he had to cover up with 2 extra goats that night. Another time in Rockingham, North Carolina, when he found himself following a Christmas parade, he received more applause than Santa Claus. Wherever he journeyed, people marveled that a wagon could be piled that wide and that high with carefully balanced junk and still move at all and remain upright. Eventually he had accumulated so much junk that he had to hook a second wagon behind the first and add rubber tires just for the benefit of his goats. He always walked alongside for more than 100,000 miles, having journeyed to Canada and every state in the U.S. except Hawaii, lamenting that those islands were just too far for his goats to swim. Besides, he laughed, even if he had gotten there, his goats most likely would have eaten the grass skirts off the hula dancers. Well, the Goat Man lectured, warned, and cajoled everyone who would listen. 2 of his favorite subjects were the Bible and women. Modern preachers, he claimed, were more interested in their collection plates than in the good book. As for women, he exclaimed, quote, "The good Lord gave me 3 wives, which proved to be 3 too many. The good book says that there will be 7 women for every man. Somebody can sure have my other 4, unquote. One day a proud woman stepped from her new Cadillac and boldly peeked into the goatman's wagon. Spying a young female goat in his bed, she demanded to know why the goat was there. The goatman replied, "I sleep with her." With a tone of superiority, the woman insisted, "If my husband slept with a goat, I'd never let him sleep with me again." Replied the goatman, "Lady, if your husband slept with some of my goats, he'd never want to sleep with you again." As I said, almost everything about him seemed enigmatic, but what was certain was that for most of his life, no one who laid eyes on him ever forgot him. As one woman remembered, "You just never forget your first goatman." The goatman's effect upon thousands of people was profound. He counseled them to consider the feelings of others, but not to value the opinions of others too much. Instead, he pleaded with people to have confidence in their own judgment, and by that act he sowed seeds that mature even today. Even those who merely glimpsed him passing by along some country road, but never heard him speak, were often deeply moved. His life was there for all to see, and it was such an astonishing spectacle. To many, the goatman was a magical being. On 15 November 1998, in Macon, Georgia, the free spirit passed away, departing his body at the age of at least 96, or he may have been 97, although he insisted that he was 106. Then again, he was rumored to be 120. Enigmatic to the end, but that's the way it is with legends. So, what made the goatman seem like a magical being to others? Well, first of all, in many respects, he was like a person with a mobile home, for he was mobile indeed, yet no one had ever seen a mobile home such as his. And in many respects, he was like a homeless person with almost nothing to his name, yet his home was packed to the hilt with a staggering quantity of possessions. What made him magical, in part, were his possessions that others could not see. There are thousands of rules by which one can and should live his life. If I were to list them all, a person might say, "Well, yes, but I already knew nearly all of them." And there's the catch. Which of those thousands of rules are the most important? As surprising as it may seem, somehow the goatman had the answer. What made him magical were his possessions that others could not see, and what he knew and what he did. I know a man who is convinced that life has consistently treated him unfairly, and another fellow who believes that he has no control over his body's weight, and another gentleman who thinks that he never owes anyone an apology for anything, and a woman who is certain that she knows everything about a subject of which she knows virtually nothing, and even a woman who thinks that all other human beings are a step below her. Those men and women are all trapped by their own inflexible considerations. The goatman, however, didn't mind having daggers thrown at him, or camping his way through life, or sleeping beside burning tires, or living with bleating goats, or smelling like one. And those were the goatman's most important possessions, his flexible considerations. Second, one must be aware that all the security that he will ever know lies in the confidence that he has in his own abilities and talents, including his ability to control his environment or be controlled by it according to his own choice. Your confidence in yourself is your only real security. And that is a lesson that many people on this planet have learned with great difficulty and too late. You are your responsibility. Every adult must direct his own life. If you do not direct your own life, then either it will be out of control, or, even worse, somebody else will direct your life for you. If you allow others to determine your decisions and actions, or lack of decisions and actions, then you will not feel responsible for the effects that result, particularly if the effects are undesirable. You will do best directing your own life at every turn. Right or wrong, you will then feel responsible for whatever results, whether you consider it to be good or bad, and it is always to your advantage to be responsible. That was a pearl of wisdom that the goat man knew. By making his own decisions and directing his own affairs, he lived his own life and maintained responsibility for it. Third, all aspects of the physical universe have been set up to be helpful. I'll explain what I mean by that. Perhaps you are sitting in a chair, which is helping you by keeping you from falling to the ground. Maybe you have a ceiling above you, which is helping to keep rain or leaves, or at least bird droppings from falling on you. Maybe you have a window near you, which is helping you to see outside without having to walk outside. Or perhaps you are outside and see a butterfly flying by. They are beautifully decorated, you know. Of course, there's no reason that they have to be, but they help by contributing beauty to the world. I've mentioned before that young children virtually always want to be helpful. They want to be firemen who put out fires, or police who arrest bad guys, or cowboys who capture cattle rustlers, or nurses who care for those who are ill, or teachers who educate other children. Adults, though, are not as consistent. An adult may help his daughter with her homework, take out the garbage, help a neighbor paint his barn, serve on a jury, direct traffic at an automobile accident, mow a hospitalized neighbor's lawn, contribute to a charity drive, plant a tree, save a fish, adopt a dog. Or he may not. Or he may allow someone to offer some friendly advice, or feed his cat while he is gone, or show him an easier way to do something, or pick up an item for him at a store, or give him a free ticket to a sporting event, water his plants, have him over for dinner, take his picture, polish his teeth, cut his hair. Or he may not. You see, everyone tends to fit, more or less, into one of these four categories. The first category is people who can help others freely and can accept help from others freely. The second category is people who can help others, but cannot accept help themselves. The third category is people who cannot help others, but can accept help themselves. And the fourth category is people who do not want anything to do with help in any way at all. By listening to these lectures, you have proven that you are not in the last grouping. Now imagine a field bisected from horizon to horizon by a sturdy fence. The near side of the field is safe and beautiful. The far side is ruled by a bad-tempered, violent bull pawing the dirt and snorting loudly, named Flatliner. The subject of help is much like the field. Those in the first category, who can help others freely and can accept help from others freely, are on the side of the field that is safe and beautiful. They may have compulsions, repressions, and eccentricities, but they operate in the world of the sane. Those in the fourth category, those who do not want anything to do with help in any way at all, are, despite any appearance to the contrary, operating in the realm of insanity. Finally, those in the second and third categories, those who can help others but not accept help themselves, and those who cannot help others but can accept help themselves, are straddling the fence. They could, with a sound bump against the fence, fall off on one side or the other. Above all else, a human being's objectives and actions must include being helpful to others. If they do not, he is lost. The Goat Man walked alongside his wagon for more than 100,000 miles, more than 160,000 kilometers, trading bric-a-brac, repairing and selling pots and pans, and a myriad of other utensils, offering fresh dairy products and moral advice, and providing a tremendous amount of amusement and excitement to untold thousands of people throughout Canada and the United States for well over half a century. What the Goat Man did was to help through his significant contributions to many others. It is even far better to live a short lifetime helping others than to live a long lifetime being of little benefit to anyone else. Quality of life is more important than quantity of years. So we know specifically what made the Goat Man magical. His possessions that others could not see, and what he knew, and what he did. He had flexible considerations, he directed his own life, and he helped countless others. People often have trouble determining and attaining appropriate objectives. Often it is wise to reevaluate your objectives. You might even need to discard some or replace them with others. At least it may be worthwhile to reaffirm that the objectives that you are working toward are rational, feasible, and yours, and not objectives that were set up for you long ago by a parent or anyone else. It is also beneficial for a person to make adjustments to his ethical code from time to time, to raise it to a higher level. If you keep an open mind so that your considerations are flexible and you do not trap yourself with your own thoughts, and if you make your own decisions, thereby directing your own life, and if your objectives and actions include being helpful to others, and if you are progressing toward those objectives, and if you have formed, subscribed to, and are adhering to a sound ethical code, then you should be at least reasonably healthy and a happy person. If you are not, then the answer can be found in that last sentence. And if you take that sentence to heart, you may be surprised how magical your life will become. I told you in Level 3, the Whole Truth series, truth and force do not mix. Truth cannot be forced. You cannot force anyone to see more truth. You can only say, please look at this. Look here. Consider this. How does this look to you? And if you steer them toward truth in a non-threatening manner, and if they are well slept and reasonably nourished, and if their ability to think has not been negatively affected by drugs, toxic chemicals, stressful emotions, collapsed space, recurring mistakes, unidentified bonsai buttons, or an ongoing close association with troublesome individuals or psychiatric brain atrocities, and if they are adhering to at least a reasonable code of ethics, and if they do not have a vested interest in not seeing more truth, then they will see more truth. And that is all that I have intended to do. Just ask you to look here and there, at this and that, and hope that you keep in mind that workable technology has no workability unless it is used. Where there is recognition of truth and subsequent understanding, there is great hope. As you may have discovered, not everyone is interested in or even willing to listen to the Mega Genius lectures. Keep in mind that some people prefer not to discover gold. Their interest is only in prospecting for it. And then there are those who can neither give nor accept help, and who do not want you or others to accept it either. They are not among the sane. It is interesting, though, that the only people who have ever criticized the lectures are just a few who have never heard them. And that is why, in my only response to those critics years ago, I suggested that they debate the value of the lectures with the thousands of appreciative listeners. I want to thank you for having listened to Level 4 of the Mega Genius Lectures, the Lost Wisdom series, and I want to reiterate what I told you at the conclusion of the Whole Truth series, which is more important than anything else that I can communicate to you, because it is a law above all other laws. That law is this: even if you are looking straight at truth, if what you see does not seem true to you, then what you are looking at, precisely the way that you perceive it, it is not the truth. I want to thank you for having listened to Level 4 of the Mega Genius Lectures, the Lost Wisdom series, and I want to reiterate what I told you at the conclusion of the Whole Truth series, which is more important than anything else that I can communicate to you, because it is a law above all other laws. That law is this: even if you are looking straight at truth, if what you see does not seem true to you, then what you are looking at, precisely the way that you perceive it, is not the truth. Therefore, if I have told you anything that does not seem true to you, please, my friend, don't you dare believe it. Lastly, I have a duty to promote the Mega Genius Lectures, because I want you and the rest of humanity to discover that life on this planet can be much better than you have ever been permitted to believe. I hope that you will help me and others who are working passionately to make it so.